Welcome to the show, Israel, and the title here is Evolution of Catholic Unbelief, or the Loss of Adam. Now let's try to, for people that are my age, there was a show where Tom Terrific would put his thinking cap on, and then all of a sudden he could think. So they say, put your thinking cap on. So we're going to try to go into some deep thinking here and see what is the bottom at the root of the problems of the American experiment. If you go to the debates of 1776, 1775, the real debates that were going on were between the theologians in England. And it's a common understanding that nothing can change unless there's first a theological shift. There has to be a theological shift in thought before anything is going to ripple into the political. But sometimes the political can force the theological to shift out of intimidation. And there's a phrase I say on the show all the time. It was made by Mark Noll. It was on when Mark Noll came. He's a famous Christian historian that's over at Notre Dame. When he came from Wheaton to Notre Dame, on the front page of the Tribune, if I remember right, they quoted him as saying that theology today has been mostly determined by the canons of Sherman and Grant. So there's an interplay. Normally, theology was the queen of the science, so when theology shifted, everything shifted. But there are exceptions. Sometimes the political, by the threat of the gun, can cause theology to shift. Basically because theology got weak, because theology, should be built on the blood of the martyrs. So the martyrs they'd rather be killed rather than be intimidated by the canons of Sherman and Grant. But that really wasn't the case here. So the evolution of Catholic unbelief, I get that from a book by Thomas McFadden, wrote this April 2019, an 80-year-old Irish Catholic. And he had written a book right before that, a much thicker book, dealing with the Catholic faith and evolution, and his wife had also written one at this time. So both of them are writing books at the very end of their life. And he basically said he was in Washington, D.C., he was an engineer, and he was sitting on a park bench, and somebody from one of the Creation Society groups, there's Creation International, there's Kenneth Ham with his Genesis Apologetics, or Genesis Answers, I'm not sure, there's a lot of them. Somebody left a gospel tract dealing with creationism, and it turned his life around. So that shows you the power of a gospel tract. But what he discovered was that the Catholics had been deceived. And we've discussed this before. And the source of the Catholic deception that they have been teaching evolution, or theistic evolution, in their schools pretty heavily, almost exclusively and heavily since Vatican II, but they have been teaching it, as McFadden points out, even at Notre Dame back in 1894. Father John Zahm kind of spearheaded the whole idea of theistic evolution in America. And it took hold. Now, why did the Catholics yield to this? Because when Zahm wrote his book, I think it was called Evolution and Dogma, he immediately becomes like real good friends with Theodore Roosevelt, who was, you would think, a guy big into survival of the fittest. I think Gladstone, the head of England. So all of a sudden, he's hobnobbing with the big world leaders. And I would assume because they really liked his idea of promoting evolution. The problem with that is, I grew up always hearing about Bronson. Okay, my dad was when he was at Notre Dame, his freshman year, he lived in Bronson Hall. And so I always kept hearing about Bronson Hall. Well, in the basement of the crypt at Notre Dame, Sacred Heart Basilica, is buried Orestes A. Bronson, and some people considered him the greatest Catholic thinker of the 19th century. When Darwin wrote his book, Origin of Species, or the title of that book also had an or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life, Bronson attacked Darwin's book, saying this book is a direct enemy of the Christian faith, and we have to fight it tooth and nail because there is no compromise with his teaching. And he fought, but he died in 1878, and by 1894, Notre Dame and Father Zahm is already going exactly the opposite of what Bronson said to do. They're coming up with the idea that you can incorporate both. And little by little, almost since Vatican II, for sure, almost every Catholic doctor, bishop, pope, priest has been arguing for that you can believe in both. Now, at the same time, the Evolution of Catholic Belief by McFadden, he cites a sociologist at Notre Dame, Christian Smith. And McFadden believes he's one of the best. And Christian Smith did an exhaustive work documenting why everybody's leaving the Catholic Church. I think there's a Bishop Barron, and they're arguing that for every person that joins the Catholic Church, 6 are leaving. Now, I got a bad cold, so you may have to put up with me here. But Christian Smith and McFadden argue that the reason they're leaving is precisely because they've been taught theistic evolution almost exclusively since Vatican II. Now, my uncles went to Notre Dame. They sat under Father McBrien, who took the mantle from Father Zahm. So my uncles, my dad were taught evolution under McBrien, but not so heavy. Now, my uncle used to fund dinosaur hunts, so he totally believed in evolution. My dad, who was before, came earlier, not so much, but it just kept picking up, and by the time Vatican II hit, people were really being indoctrinated. So by the time I went to Notre Dame, which was still before they had girls, I was taught by Father Murphy, 1970. And this is typical of Catholic universities at this time. And this was the book. I still have the book. Historical Genealogy. It was produced in 1969 at Yale University. And the origin of the book goes back, I think it says 1920s, and then they keep updating it. And I have a friend who taught in the public schools here for 42 years and was getting her master's summer classes at Notre Dame. She had Father Murphy in the 70s. And I know for sure, and I still have some of the notes, he taught, and this was 3 days a week for a whole year, he taught very strong evolution, didn't bring God in at all, so it wasn't even theistic evolution, and that we came from the monkey. And she said, when he would get to that part about how he came from the monkey, he'd get even more intense. She could describe how he would get. So this is something that we were really being pushed into. I was unaware. I was just trying to get good grades, and as a lot of Catholics, I had never read the Bible. And other classes were leading me totally away from the scriptures, behavioristic psychology, which was basically atheistic. So this was typical. This is what was happening. And McFadden argues is that because people were taught theistic evolution, in the Catholic institutions and schools and everywhere, that the children, starting at age even 10, 13, 15, were already making up their mind that science offered a better explanation on who they were. Okay, now this is a huge difference on who you think you are. Okay, so when a child has to determine who he is, pure religion in the sight of God is to visit the fatherless and the widows in their distress. So obviously, being without a father is a huge factor in how you see yourself. So if you have a father, you identify with that father, speaking of a son more. And if your grandfather comes into the scene, and you notice that your father honors him like you would honor your father, so now your grandfather has even more honor. And some people even are able to know their great-grandfather, and the great-grandfather is going to have more honor than the father or grandfather. It's just natural. Well, with the Catholic Church embracing evolution, they intellectually cannot have a literal Adam and Eve anymore. The Adam has to become a myth. And what does that mean? Well, let's look at the book of Sirach, and that would be it's called Ecclesiasticus, chapter 49, verse 16. Now, this is the book of Sirach, Ecclesiastes, and this is the King James. I think the Catholic, the Douay Rheims, it might be chapter 50. But here's what it says. Sem, or Shem, and Seth were in great honor among men, and so was Adam above every living thing in creation. Okay, obviously. Another way of other translation is Adam is to be honored above all. Okay, it's obvious. You honor your dad, and if you do, your mom and dad. And what does St. Paul say in Ephesians? The first commandment with a promise is the commandment to honor your father and your mother, so that things will go well with you and you'll live a long life. Well, the Protestant and Catholic churches have understood that to mean all authority. Okay, so your grandfather would deserve even more honor than your father, your great-grandfather. And this is pointing out that Adam, born directly by God, deserves more honor than anybody. And we know that Abraham Lincoln and people like that get more honor than Adam. Adam doesn't really exist as far as we're concerned. That right there tells you that we're really in a predicament. So the evolution of Catholic unbelief, which he goes through, highlights the course, and he believes it's totally a lie. And the reason we know it's a lie are the genealogies. And if you go to the genealogies in the Bible, you're going to go and you're going to see that they're very precise. Genesis chapter 4, verse 25. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son and called his name Seth. Okay. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he was called Enos. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. And then it begins and repeats it. And it says Adam lived 130 years and had Seth. And then Adam lived 800 years and had sons and daughters and died. And Adam lived 930 years, and it goes in very specific details, point by point. Seth then lived 105 years, and he had Enos. And Seth lived after he begat Enos 807 years and begat sons and daughters. All the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And Enos lived 900. Okay, and it goes in detail. Methuselah, and all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. It goes in detail. Then it talks about Noah. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It takes you all the way up to Abraham. And the church believed that those years were real. But McFadden points out in the Catholic faith, they don't really believe it's real up till Abraham. And when I was taught by Father Murphy, and I remember this pretty well, the book began by first pointing out that it's called early speculation, and said that the church, until we had the scientific approach, which is about 18th century, but it says there were people, and of course he's mostly citing Protestants, and the famous one is Archbishop Usher, primate of Ireland, in 1658, wrote this: "In the beginning, God created heaven and earth," Genesis chapter 1, 5 and 1, "which beginning of time, according to our chronology, fell upon the entrance of night preceding the 23rd day of October in the year of the Julian calendar, 710, i.e., 404 BC. Okay, so this is what I was reading as a freshman, and it closes here. "The uprooting of such fantastic beliefs began with the Scottish geologist James Hutton, whose theory of the earth, published in 1785, maintained that the present is the key to the past." So all of a sudden, all of Christian theology at the fundamental point was overturned. It was made to look ridiculous if you believed those genealogies. Those genealogies led you to believe the earth is about 6,000 to 7,000 years old. But science made people that believed that look ridiculous. Now, the South, before the Civil War, was the Bible Belt, and they were tenacious in holding to six-day creation. And if anybody didn't believe Moses wrote the first 5 books and didn't believe in six-day creation, they pretty much had to leave the South if they wanted to teach anywhere. There wasn't any place in the South they could teach. But the North they could teach easy. And with the North winning the war, theology, which was the queen of the science in almost all colleges, then dropped. The result of that war, in fact, you could say the war, really, that was the primary result of that war on the intellectual and theological level. When the North won, theology had to take a step back. And their fundamental position was the world is 6,000 years old. Adam and Eve are absolutely historical. And Moses wrote the first 5 books. That was totally under the attack, and only very few places in the North held to that. Because this was the sweep of free thinkers, the sweep of Marxism, which was a big part of the Northern thinking. And Notre Dame was in the North. Notre Dame, after the Civil War, William Tecumseh Sherman, 1865, gave the commencement speech. So Notre Dame eventually yielded to the whole political atmosphere in the North. And the yielding comes up with Zam, writing the book Evolution and Dogma, Theistic Evolution, arguing that Augustine and Aquinas believed in theistic evolution, that the world was super old, and it took billions of years to bring man to existence. And basically, evolution, of course, I don't think anybody doubts the definition of evolution. It's the idea that there was this small little mass, and there was a big bang, and this small little mass of matter then became everything we know of now. And 14 billion years ago this happened, and 4 billion years ago somehow the Earth came, and there was a primordial soup, and then there's electrical coming into the soup, and then somehow out of that, small forms of life, very small forms of life, and then that took root, and bigger forms of life, an amoeba. An amoeba turns into a reptile, or a fish. Fish turns into a reptile. You got the monkey, and then the man, and that's who we are. That's who we are. Now, with Father Murphy, studying a freshman year at Notre Dame, and behavioristic psychology, which is atheistic B.F. Skinner, well, I had no choice but to think that's who I am. It's who I am. So, saying the Apostles' Creed, which was my tradition every morning and night, I'd get on my knees and say the Apostles' Creed, which was, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Well, let me tell you, I couldn't say that prayer in all honesty and then believe this. And I couldn't believe that Father Murphy could be telling me a lie. And I've said it before, this is a super important issue. And when Notre Dame, when I was a freshman, Notre Dame football team went to the Cotton Bowl and played Texas. This was Theismann and Tom Gatewood. And I wasn't going to Notre Dame football. I mean, there was a lot of, like, Father Burchell, he was the guy that was going to take Hesburgh's place. There was like a strong movement. Even though I was raised under total Lombardi, my football coach wanted me to go out for football at Notre Dame, which of course was not realistic. But I had no interest in football. But my roommates say, let's go to that game. Okay, so I go to the game. And when I get there, they had a huge conference of Christian college kids. And so they had their Bible. I had never read the Bible. But I'm thinking, these kids believe in Adam and Eve. So I'm debating them. New Year's Eve, I'm debating, getting into arguments on the street. And I said, I'll be right back. You got a book? I'm going to get a book. And I went and found a bookstore and found the book that I was going to go and debate them with, The Naked Ape by Desmond Morris. I mean, this really had this is what I was interested in. And before I got out of the bookstore, I was way in the back of the bookstore. Two guys grabbed me, take me in the back of the bookstore. Two policemen come, put me in the squad car, and take me down to what is now called the Lee Harvey Oswald Jail. And I bailed out the next morning. And other things happened besides that impressed this on my mind. I never forgot. In fact, a year ago I retrieved the arrest papers on that, and it said 10:30 at night. They fingerprinted me into that jail, and it says shoplifting under $5, and the book I stole was Naked Ape. Okay, so I have a record of it. I'm not just saying this out of my head, which if I was hearing somebody say this, I'd probably say he's probably just saying it out of his head. But it interested me then. The subject is of intense. And that's why McFadden wrote the book, The Evolution of Catholic Unbelief. 6 Catholics are leaving the faith for everyone joining, and he said the reason is they're being taught theistic evolution. Christian Smith, and he backs it up by research at Notre Dame by the sociologist Christian Smith, that's the reason they're leaving. That the science gives a better explanation for who they are and where they came from. But who do they think they are? And who do they think they came from? And where are they going? What's their purpose in life if your great-great-grandfather goes back to some primordial soup from a Big Bang experience? And instead of, you think that your great-great-grandfather goes back to Adam. Now, Jesus knew who he was, and we're to know who we are. And if you go to the genealogy that Luke lays out, it says here, and the Holy Ghost descended in a bodily shape like a dove upon him, Jesus, and a voice came from heaven which said, Thou art my beloved Son. In thee I am well pleased. And Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli, which was the son of Matthat, which was the son of Levi, and he goes on and on and on and on, which was the son of Jesse, or it goes on, it says, which was the son of David, which was the son of Jesse, which was the son of Obed, it goes on and on and on, which was the son of Jacob, which was the son of Isaac, which was the son of Abraham, goes on and on and on, which was the son of Methuselah, which was the son of Enoch, goes on, which was the son of Enos, which was the son of Seth, which was the son of Adam, which was the son of God. Now, who would have a stronger identity? The one that says, this is my genealogy? Yeah, the Jews always kept their genealogies in the temple, and then the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, so they really don't know who their identity is as far as genealogies. But we have Jesus' genealogy right here. And most people don't have theirs. I can go back a couple hundred years, maybe. Jesus could go all the way back to Adam. And of course, if you're in Christ, by faith, God adopts you and puts you into Christ. There's a physical component to being put in Christ, and you could argue. We go back to Adam. And if you don't have that, which is what McFadden's been arguing, then you're going to lose your Catholic identity. It's not just Catholic. A lot of churches are doing this. But normally, if you were like me, at the youngest of age, as in my church back in Wisconsin, you're 3 years old, 2 years old, 4 years old, and you're not required to pay attention, but you had to behave. You couldn't really make a noise or move around much, but you could move your head. And the first thing you saw was the big, huge glass-stained window showing Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden. Well, it was there for me to find my identity. So my identity's in that. And that helps create your identity. Yeah, I'm connected to that. And then you're taught, Adam and Eve sinned. There's original sin. And when he sinned, I sinned. Just like it says that when Jesus died, we died with him. When he rose, we rose with him. Catholic understanding from Augustine, that would include Luther, that would include Calvin, is that when Adam sinned, we sinned in Adam. And so we can identify with that sin. Evolution, theistic evolutionists, they try to say, well, that doesn't affect that. But what McFadden's showing, younger kids don't believe it. They don't believe that you can mix them. By the time they graduate from Notre Dame, they act like that they're compatible. But not younger people. They cannot believe that you can believe in evolution, that 14 billion years ago, and then the primordial soup to the life, non-life coming to life, which is an impossibility. Life cannot come from non-life, but you have to believe that if you believe in evolution. And then it goes to amoeba, fish, reptile, monkey, man, over millions and billions of years. And that's compatible with how God says he created the world. That's what they want to say. Oh, that doesn't conflict with Genesis, where it says evening and morning, the first day, evening and morning, the second day. And on the sixth day, God created Adam out of the dust of the ground. And then Eve out of his rib. And Adam lived 930 years and then died. Seth lived, can't remember, 910 years and then he died. So you get exact perfect. That's why Ussher wanted to claim that the earth is 404 years ago, BC. That's how old the earth was when he wrote this, 1658. That the earth began 404, but there's several guys that tried, but they were very close. I mean, the point is, no church father ever believed that the world was older than like 8,000 years. They all believed in Adam and Eve as historical. There may have been allegorical aspects about it, but the allegorical never diminished the literal. Okay, so Adam is essential. If you want things to go well and live a long life, you must honor your father. And who's going to say that doesn't mean Adam? Adam is to be honored above all. And if you read that's book of Sirach, Ecclesiasticus, you could argue that's a command. I mean, you are commanded to honor your father and mother. And Adam above all. So in a way, you could say that you are commanded to honor Adam above all. Jesus said John the Baptist was the greatest man born of a woman. But not greater than Adam. Adam was created directly by God. So if you have a theology that does not honor Adam above all and place him in the highest position and give him most attention, most of your attention, most of your theology is drawing off of a literal Adam. That's not what's happening. People don't believe he exists. And that's what is going on. Now, if we double that with what the arguments were in the American Revolution, McFadden is not alone here, let me just say. He drew a lot off of a fellow that graduated from Temple University with a physics major who was an engineer, a successful engineer, who then became a priest. And this fella, this is the guy, Victor Warkulwiz, wrote a book, The Doctrines of Genesis 1 through 11, a compendium in defense of traditional Catholic theology on origins. And he goes through point by point, establishing that the traditional way is what science supports, and without which you're in trouble. One of the greatest Catholic teachers at the time of Vatican II, going way back before World War II, was Cardinal Ruffini. He was in charge of a lot of the seminaries and what was taught there. And if you read his book, The Theory of Evolution Judged by Reason and Faith, he argued that the belief in a historical Adam and Eve is of the essence of the faith. And if you read McFadden and these guys, you pick up that it was considered heresy not to hold to a literal Adam and Eve, because basically it is of the essence of the faith. It's the foundation. What's the first thing the Apostles' Creed said? I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. When you say you believe in God, what are you believing in? Not just three little letters. You're believing in the creator of heaven and earth. And then if somebody was to say, And how did he create it? Well, the Apostles' Creed was short, so you can't carry along books. This was a summary. But they would have all said, the people who wrote that way back in the early centuries, if somebody would have stopped and said, well, can we stop and can you tell us how he created it? They would have all said, well, he created it in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested, which is the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments says you are to honor the Sabbath day because, this is what it says, because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. That's been destroyed. Kids, you can't believe that now if you're going to believe what they're teaching in the Catholic schools. And they continue to teach it, and there's a movement now to try to overcome, which I believe is a heresy, and that said it's not safe. It is dangerous. It's dangerous to sit under it. It's super dangerous to be teaching it because the Scripture says the teachers are going to be judged much more harshly. So whoever's teaching that, and that is causing all these people to leave the church at a young age. Now, if they find another Christian fellowship, fine, but who knows when they leave where they're going, because the only path they can really start going to in a way is ultimately atheism, because Darwinism and atheism kind of go. Now, here's a book I just picked up from the library, just written a year ago. This is called Finding Ourselves After Darwin. Okay? And on the back is they have 3 quotes from 3 scholars. The one, Jim Stump, who's Biologos, he taught at Bethel College, where I got my master's degree. And he got fired from Bethel because he started teaching theistic evolution. And he got a job with Biologos, which is this huge organization promoting theistic evolution. So at Bethel, you get fired if you're not teaching 6-day creation. But at Notre Dame, you'll never get a job there if you don't teach theistic evolution. So you're seeing that this really is the divide. And another thing, I'm reading this book here, people make these claims, they contradict each other. I'm hearing all the time, it's been proven now that we all came from just 2 parents. Well, what's the first thing I read in a book just written? And these guys just wrote this, it's all kinds of contributors. It lists like 12 contributors. And one of the first things I'm seeing, the guy says, well, science has almost proved conclusively that we did not come from 2 people. Well, so you go over here, it's been proven conclusively we came from just two people. Then you go over here wander over to this group. It's been proven by science conclusively that we came from, they call it polygenous, from a group of people. Not from just a man and a woman, one pair. So they're totally arguing, but let's go back to what's really at the root here. At the root is the theology of 1776. And America is a great experiment. At the essence of the experiment was a huge revolution in Christian thought. America came up with the notion, at the essence of the experiment, that authority comes from the people. So our Constitution says we, the people, ordain this Constitution, and that all true authority rests in the people. What did people say up till then? Almost all Christian nations, of course, said authority comes from Jesus Christ. So no law could be passed that was contrary to the teachings of Jesus Christ in any Christian nation. It just couldn't happen. But with America, we said no. We rewrote a constitution that not only does not even mention Jesus Christ, doesn't even mention God. Just we the people, and the authority comes from the people. So how did they get away with that? And this is the revolution that we're suffering under. So that fathers have no basis of authority to run their home. Up till America, the slave-master relationship was like a norm. Just assumed the master-slave relationship was legit, not with our way of thinking. The concept was evil. But then it's an evil concept to imagine that the husband, which is the boss over the wife, that he has a duty to command the wife and she has a duty to obey him. That's an evil concept for us. We don't believe it. Because if authority is with the people, then it turns everything on its head. The husband doesn't really have authority. So right now we're dealing with impeachment. Well, it's hard to imagine that the president, whoever it is, has any authority in themselves. It comes from the people. And at any time, the people can just say, we want to get rid of you, and come up with any excuse. But here, let me give you the argument that was at the core of the American Revolution and the lie. And this is Fletcher writing. This is John Wesley's right-hand man, who Wesley had assigned to take his place when he died. And both Wesley and Fletcher wrote several pamphlets and books set in 1775, 76. But let's getting to the crux of the issue. Fletcher writes, and this is called A Word About the Origin of Power. I believe with St. Paul that the powers that are ordained of God, who is the fountain of all power and the author of all government. I date the divine communication of power from the paradisical age, paradise. Yea, from the hour in which God said to Adam and Eve, multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over every living thing. Here, sir, and he's writing to the two great theologians, one from Bristol, one from London, Evans and Price. Here, sir, is the original grant of power, and whosoever wantingly resists the power which providence calls him to obey, breaks this great political charter of God, which is so strongly and so frequently confirmed in the gospel. And then his opponent writes, when Adam became a father, he had as much power as any other father. And his opponent writes, does not every father receive the same divine right of dominion? Asserting that, quote, there is nothing to be inferred from the parental authority of Adam, but is equally applicable to all parents without exception. Fletcher writes, now we're getting right to the issue here. I reply that it is contrary to all divinity to say that every parent is endued with all the authority which Adam was invested with when God said to him, subdue the earth and have dominion. You are too judicious a divine not to speak a different language in the pulpit. You know, sir, that Adam was invested with characters which he could not communicate to all his posterity, and which consequently are not common to all men. A simile will possibly convince you of your mistake. King George III is with respect to his children what Adam was with respect to his posterity. He is a father and a king. The first character he can entail upon all his sons, but the second he can entail upon none but the Prince of Wales. Okay, so think about it. King George, let's say he has 6 sons, he dies. Under our system today, King George dies, all 6 sons would just share. That's what we've turned it into. It's chaos. A father dies, there's no way of knowing now who's in charge of the whole family. All 6 sons are in charge. That was never that way until America. The oldest son took the place. So there was an orderly transition when the father died. Same with Adam. When Adam died, not everybody on the earth equally shared in Adam's authority as king. It was distributed in a certain fashion. It could have all gone to one son. I don't know. When Adam died, he was 930. So I don't know exactly how Adam had set it up. But it didn't go to everybody. So Adam dies, and his kingly authority is given to either one or specific people. Okay, so Noah had 3 sons, and they spread out and ruled the whole earth. But Noah had kingly authority, which was originally with Adam. So the argument here is Adam now dies and authority comes from Adam. Let's read on. Fletcher, writing to his opponents, Price and Evans, you try to embarrass the question by saying, you must tell us who is Adam's heir. What does it signify what power Adam had or what power he left behind him to his successors unless we certainly know who those successors are? Fletcher says, but I reply that in every country those who share in the dominion given to Adam and Eve in their regal capacity are as much known as the king and parliament are known in England, the Doga and Senate in Venice, the emperor and diet in Germany, the monarch in France, and the despot in Prussia. Okay, now this is the most important phrase here. Let's slow it down. So they say, well, hold it here. We don't. Yeah, Adam dies. He was the king of the earth. He was given the mandate to rule the earth and take dominion. But when he dies, we don't know who shares in that. And we're going, I'm thinking, oh, so Adam hadn't designated to anybody when he died who was going to take over? Well, everybody wasn't going to take over and equally share it, which is what the theologians for the patriots of this country. So now you have families. We got rid of what they call primogeniture, where the oldest son is the one that becomes the replacement for the father to a large degree, so that there's an orderly transition. So somebody's in charge. That was always the case. But the theologians argued that when Adam died, there was no transferring of power, except all equal. No theologian ever believed that. And that's why he writes, that is contrary to all divinity to say that every parent is endued with all the authority which Adam was invested with. You are too judicious a divine not to speak a different language in the pulpit. In other words, no one ever preached this. They all preached Adam's authority was transferred. And those who have authority share in Adam's authority that originated there. And now, if you are President Trump, if you're Putin, if you're a prime minister in England, or if you're the guy in Kim in Korea, what's happening? Right, what he says here. But I reply that in every country, those who share in the dominion given to Adam and Eve in their regal or kingly capacity are as much known as the king and parliament are known in England, the Doga and Senate in Venice, the emperor and diet in Germany, the monarchs in France, and the despot in Prussia. So whether they're conscious of it or not, theology, which should be the ruling subject, but what got crushed with the Civil War. All theology says who's ever ruling is only ruling because through Adam. They're sharing in Adam's authority. But I reply that in every country, those who share in the dominion or authority given to Adam and Eve in their kingly capacity. That's what's happening. But they don't believe that. They're completely unaware of it, probably because they all believe in evolution of some kind, in some fashion. Or they could say they believe in creation, but they haven't made the connection what it means. What's it mean? I believe in six-day creation. Oh, so then you believe in Adam and Eve. So then you believe that those in authority, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the President, that what they're doing is sharing in Adam's authority. That authority, that power that was lodged just in Adam, and then after he died, that power then was shared with specific governments or nations or people, not to everybody. But most people, they haven't made the connection. So you have Christians that believe in Adam and Eve, but they make no connection to the political, which is super dangerous. Super dangerous. Theology ought to rule the political, but we've allowed the canons and Sherman and Grant to control the theological, which shouldn't be happening. But Civil War created that. and nobody's fought back. Nobody's been successful to drive it back. So you have a disconnect of a lot of huge proportions. In Romans 13, which is the chapter on government, the way it says, I think the King James probably has it right, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resist the power, resist the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. See, so who are you resisting? Well, you're resisting God, but you're resisting Adam. You're dishonoring who Adam was. And of course, when you believe in evolution, what are you doing? Well, you're dishonoring Adam. You're denying he even existed. You're denying he's even historical. That's a huge dishonor. I mean, didn't you grow up with friends that, that's my old man. They so disrespected their dad, they acted, forget my dad. I'm greater than my dad. I don't care what my dad says. Complete dishonor. Acted like he didn't even exist. Well, we couldn't be more dishonorable. And what's the result? Well, if you honor who you're supposed to honor, things will go well and you'll live a long life. But if you dishonor your father, Jesus said to the Pharisees, how come you dishonor your parents? He said, and whoever curses his parents is surely to be put to death. Jesus said that twice. So, in a sense, we're cursing Adam, who's to be honored above all. You got your father, you're to honor your father. But when your grandfather walks into the room, he gets more honor than your dad. And then your great-grandfather walks into the room, he gets more honor than your father and your grandfather, of course. And when Adam walks in, that's why it says Adam is to be honored above all. Are we doing it? And what price are we paying? By saying he never existed. Because science, what is science? Science is the canons of Sherman and Grant. They don't have any evidence behind them. No, you've been seduced and lured by the 30 pieces of silver, however it's happened, intimidated. I was going to look up, okay. There's a famous quote here. We should all have it in our repertoire. 1 Timothy chapter 6. At the end. Timothy, very end of Ephesians. O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Grace be with thee. Amen. So it happened to me. I had Father Murphy. I had all that. But I was enrolled in the seminary out of 8th grade back in 1966. So when I went to Dallas and was confronted with this, that became my issue. Because I only withdrew from the seminary because it seemed the seminaries were kind of getting strange then. So I think could have been right to withdraw and then wait. So I was tuned in, but I still hadn't read the Bible. Still hadn't, wasn't trying to, I figured, well, how would you know how to live unless you read the Bible? But I didn't trust anybody telling me. And pursuing that path of evolution that puts you on you, it's an atheistic path. And it's a dead end. But I ran so fast on that path that I knew I was on the wrong path. I mean, boom, I got shocked. So I was able to make the switch by the grace of God, of course. But most people are lulled into it, like the frog that dies, slow boil. And little by little, they're totally captivated by it. And they can't get out. And it is this science falsely so called. O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings, which is all what evolution is. Darwin, there's nothing to it. The professor there at Darwin at Cambridge, when he came out with it, he said, this is a joke. What he's writing, it's worthless. Avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. The consequence of evolution is you lose Adam. And you're supposed to honor Adam above all. And when you fail to do that, it's a disintegration of the culture. And we're seeing the disintegration. And until we get our theology right, and you lay the foundation again, like Cardinal Ruffini said, this is the foundation. This is the first statement of the Apostles' Creed. You know, if you can say, oh yeah, I believe in, I believe in God, but I believe He created the world by the process of evolution. That's not what the Scripture says. It says in detail how He did create it. So when you say, oh, I believe He created by, you're flying in the face of all those Scriptures, all the church fathers, all the tradition of the church, up until just recently. So it's real revolutionary that you're on. And with the American Revolution, magnified by the Second French Revolution, which is the Civil War, we're way off. And the beginning, where do you want to begin? Get back to Adam. Start honoring him and start believing like Jesus believed and the apostles believed, the apostles' doctrine, the apostles' creed. Jeremiah said, return to the ancient path. That's called repentance, changing your mind, and do not be conformed to this world, but rather be renewed in the spirit of your mind. These things need to happen. But when you go to these educational systems, when you get into the educational system, most of them are founded on the belief in evolution. It's a very narrow path when you're there, very narrow, and it takes intensity and a laser focus to get through. So hopefully it's helpful. It's Peter Helland on the show Israel.